The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome everybody to this 10-minute podcast where I'm going to share with you a few of my thoughts of how as a school business manager I've evaluated my own professional skills and the impact they have had on my workplace. To help you understand my role, I will take a few moments to describe the context of my school, as this will help you to understand the nature of my role. I'm a school business manager in a two-form entry primary academy where over 60% of the children have English as an additional language. The eligibility for free school meals is approximately 25%. Therefore, there are 420 pupils and 80 staff, and other initiatives we are involved in are we're a lead school for a Teaching School Alliance and also a national support school, and also a provider of school-based initial teacher training. So as you can imagine, the role and responsibilities are varied. I've been at the school since 2008, and the last 8 years have been a journey for me personally, but also for the school. In 2012, my school was one of the few primary schools that decided as an outstanding school that we should seize the opportunity and convert to an academy. As you can imagine, the year prior to the conversion and the year after conversion were a time of increased workload for my role as the school business manager, and it was to ensure that I ensured that the vision of the school was realised and the changes that this brought about were embedded within the school within the shortest possible time frame. The whole academy conversion process meant that I had to draw on numerous skills, and I thought I would select some of the aspects of the conversion process that challenged me the most. The first of these is about my negotiating skills and my ability to manage conflict. Up until academy conversion was first mentioned, my school had a very stable workforce, and most of the staff having been at the school in excess of 10 years. You can imagine the reaction I got when I had to begin a formal TUPE process with each and every one of them. TUPE stands for Transfer of Undertakings, Protection of Employment Regulations 1981, which in essence meant that all of the school staff who were then employed by the local authority had to have their contracts transferred over to the new academy, as they would no longer be employed by the local authority. For me to try and ease their concerns about this process, it was vital that I was fully prepared for these negotiations. We had already had a formal consultation phase, which had allowed them to ask questions, and they had also had the opportunity to raise any concerns they had with regard to the conversion process. At the end of the consultation phase, the governors agreed to proceed with the conversion, even though there was a handful of staff not in favour of the decision. I knew that the climate for my initial meeting with these staff on the TUPE process was going to be quite hostile, so I made sure I was fully prepared and knew exactly what my objectives for the meeting were, as well as ensuring I had all the information and knowledge I needed on the process at my fingertips. I had to approach the meeting with empathy and understanding for the position that they were all in, but I still had to explain the procedure and sequence of events that the TUPE process had to follow. It was clear they had concerns about future salary levels falling below the local authorities, and also concerns regarding the non-contractual benefits that they would be losing, for example, subsidised travel on local buses. By carrying out a review of their position, I was able to establish where their concerns were coming from and come to the meeting with proposals to try and reassure them that conversion to academy status was not going to have any negative impact on their contract. During each meeting we had lengthy discussions, but I ensured at the end of each one we had reached an agreement, which I would always follow up when I distributed the minutes by the next day. On several occasions during the conversion process, I had to make presentations to various stakeholders, and I needed to ensure I was communicating effectively. The skills I needed for this were to make sure that I had completely researched the content of my presentation and knew which element would require more persuasion than the other aspects of the presentation. I always started each presentation with an introduction, then gave a brief outline of the content and the estimated time for the presentation, before then working through the main content section by section. At the end, I would always recap on the main points before ending with a conclusion and time for the audience to ask questions. Although my presentations were always visual, I found it really hard to introduce more interesting methods of communicating the information. But by keeping them as brief and to the point as necessary, I felt that I could keep the audience engaged throughout each presentation. Prior to studying for the Advanced Diploma in School Business Management, I had never given formal presentations before, but studying for that course and attending numerous face-to-face days, I gained the confidence to practice in front of peers where it didn't matter if I made mistakes. This practice of making presentations really helped for when I had to deliver the more formal presentations to numerous stakeholders during the conversion process. I had learned that non-verbal communication, i.e. the way I stood up in front of the audience and how I presented myself, were just as important as the structure and the delivery of the presentation itself. I am still not perfect, but I am now confident when faced with these types of situations, which seem to have become more frequent as my role as a school business manager has evolved. Another aspect I would like to share with you is that of evaluating the system we had in place for professional development of all staff at the school. A few years ago, I carried out a review of this, and it became clear there were gaps and inconsistencies with how the process worked, depending on the various line managers carrying out the process and the various roles we had in the school. For example, the process for teachers seemed to be much more robust and thorough than the process we had in place for support staff. I therefore decided to tackle two key areas initially, as there were too many areas in all for me to concentrate at once. So I focused on the induction process and job descriptions. I set up an induction checklist for each role we had in the school, so that the person responsible for the induction had a tick list to work through, and only when each area had been ticked would the induction be signed off as having been completed. It took a very long time to try and detail all of the processes that a new member of staff needed to be trained on. But once I had the core areas, which were the same regardless of the role, then it was just a case of adding the sections specific to each role. I needed to ask for some expertise with some of the areas, as clearly anything that was taking place in a classroom I would not necessarily know about. I was then able to issue a draft induction checklist to one person from each of the different roles we had at the school. For example, teacher, teaching assistant, midday supervisor, admin staff. And they then worked through the list and advised me of any gaps or entries that needed to be changed. This now means that for every new member of staff, I have an induction checklist to ensure that from day one at the school, we are starting off their CPD with a really good process in place. The other area I focused on was updating the job descriptions to ensure that every role in the school had an accurate job description that each member of staff could refer to. This was really important when performance-related pay for teachers was introduced, as it would not have been possible to assess this without both the teacher and line manager referring to a job description. I must admit this job has been a lengthy one, but now having completed it, we are able to issue a job description to every new member of staff when they join the school, as well as staff who are already in position. It has also helped the senior leadership team to focus on the salary grade more specifically to the actual role when advertising for new staff, which I believe will have a long-term saving on our staff costs. I hope that this has been useful to you in regards to thinking about evaluating your own professional skills and the impact that they have had on your workplace. Thank you for listening.